So, welcome everyone. My name is Zachary Nelson. I'm the program director for Global Cleveland. I want to thank everyone who is participating in this first session of Global Cleveland's 2023 Global Employers Series. So this series provides resources to the business community and to the community at large on how to successfully engage global talent that we have here in Cleveland to fill workforce needs, drive growth and productivity, and contribute to economic growth across Northeastern Ohio. I want to remind everyone that while this is the first session that we are having, our second session will be on Zoom February 15th, this Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. So if you have not already done so, please register for that free session. I also want to thank our generous sponsors, which is SwageLock, Team Neo, Brown Immigration Law, the City of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, Clockwork 9, and the Greater Cleveland Partnership. Now, we will take questions at the end of the session, so if you have a question, please send it through the chat. I'd like to introduce David Fleschler, Global Cleveland's former board chair and vice provost for international affairs for Case Western Reserve University, who will be introducing this Global Employer Series first presenter. David, thank you.
Zachary, thank you very much, and I'm really excited to be doing this because, as we say often, many of the best and brightest people from around the world come to Cleveland, come to Cleveland State, come to Case Western Reserve, come to John Carroll, all of our institutions in Northeast Ohio, and they're here for a number of years. And they come in many ways to love Northeast Ohio. And if we can have them stay, and if we can have them stay with our employers, we know what a great advantage it is for businesses, for industry in Northeast Ohio. So thank you all very much for being here and for learning some of the tricks of the trade, as it were. And you're going to be learning from two terrific people, both colleagues of mine at Case Western Reserve. The first is Drew Poppleton, who since 2019 has been the director of postgraduate planning and experiential education at Case Western Reserve University. Drew provides strategic leadership and fiscal oversight of a 14-member staff and an $800,000 budget, supporting services in a variety of areas, including career services, pre-professional advising, that means pre-med, pre-health, pre-law, undergraduate research, and entrepreneurship. He also serves on the division's executive leadership team. Drew has been with the university since 2008 and really understands how international students relate to the business community. And we'll look forward to hearing from Drew. I'd also like to introduce Marilena Maggio, who since 2013 has been the Director of International Student Services at Case Western Reserve University. So let me tell you a little about Mar. She oversees the coordination of the ISS, International Student Service Office's full range of services, which includes providing expert knowledge about visa options and federal compliance, as well as programs and activities that foster social and cultural adjustment for international students. In particular, Mar is the go-to expert on our campus regarding any visa issue. And that in particular includes our subject today, which the specifics of which is curricular practical training, or CPT. Mar began her career at Case Western Reserve in 2006, and so understands our students, particularly our international students, very well. So with that as an introduction, I'll turn it over to Drew and look forward to today's session. Thanks to both of you.
Thanks for the introduction, David, and thanks to Global Cleveland for first offering this series. As David mentioned, I think it's so important. It's such a great idea, and we're really excited to kick off the series by talking about CPT in this first presentation. So I'm going to share my screen here. Make sure everyone can see it. We're good. Okay. And yeah, thanks to Mar for joining me in this presentation. I think Mar and I have worked together since the moment I started at Case Western Reserve University, and my first role was actually as a employer experience specialist, and I ran what is known as our practicum program, which is our formalized internship program, through which our international students, many of them go in order to get CPT and gain experience. And so Mar and I have worked together to help students navigate this journey for over a decade now. So hopefully between the two of us, we can provide some insights into the process and answer any questions you have. But before we get into some of the details of CPT, what it is, how it works, the process, I wanted to kind of do just a little bit of a level set here about the current landscape in our region. So this is taken from a 2021 Team NEO report that basically looked at who is gaining post-secondary credentials in our region versus the demand. And as this report shows, we are a little bit behind where the demand is. So even though we're at about 37% in 2020, the projected demand in 2025 is 65%. So obviously there's a huge demand for skilled and qualified talent in the region. And I'm sure with this audience, this is not anything new to you all who are managing searches for high-level opportunities. But our population is decreasing, and our population within the labor force also is decreasing. So I think as a community, and as the report says, we really have to think about how are we going to fulfill these talent gaps. And I think part of our message today is that our international student population is definitely part of the solution. So courtesy of Global Cleveland, we have nearly 7,000 international students in Northeast Ohio right now, many of whom are studying those STEM disciplines where a lot of those high demand jobs lie, your technology, your data science. We know that the number of opportunities out there far outstrips the talent pool right now. But we have a huge talent pool in our international student population who want to gain experience. They've come to Cleveland, as David mentioned in his introduction. They want to stay here. They want to work with local employers, and they want to start their careers in the US. They came to study in the United States for a reason, and they don't want to just gain their education and then go back home. They do want to stay here, and I think we have an opportunity to engage them in that endeavor. And the main point that we want to make through this presentation is that it really is probably easier than you think to hire international students, and especially when we're talking about CPT, curricular practical training. As we'll discover throughout this presentation, most of the work is on the institution's part. We are the ones processing the paperwork, helping the students through the system. From an employer perspective, there is very little difference between hiring an international student for an internship or a co-op than there is a domestic student. So it is pretty easy. Just to give you a sense of what the international student population looks like at Case, you can see here it's almost 19% of our total student population, so just over 2,200 international students here. And as you can also see, that is growing. So that's a 58% increase since 2012. So when you think about the fact that our population in general in the region is declining, the international student population at Case is growing. So again, a great source of talent. You can see the breakdown a little bit between undergrads and grads. They represent a larger portion of our graduate student population, about 24%. And then about 13% of our undergraduate student population, and they represent over 100 countries. So we know that in addition to finding skilled qualified talent for your positions. A lot of employers are, as they should be, very interested in diversifying their workforce. And I think this is another source of that diversification. Mar, anything I missed about the population at Case or that you'd like to emphasize here?
No, I think you hit all the statistics. That the only thing I can think to add is that, you know, over 100 countries here are represented, and that's since the time I've been here, we've always kind of hovered around 80, 86, some place in there, but it's just in efforts through the university also to diversify its student population and seek out the best of the best, right? That we're seeing even more countries and more perspectives and things like that represented, which are really important in a global economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for mentioning that. I mean, I think that's a really important point, that even though they may not want to return home, they come from all these different places. They have knowledge of the culture and the operations. And so for most of these employers who are probably global in nature or maybe looking to expand, that's also an asset that they bring, that they can help you with that as well. Okay, so when international students come to the United States to study, they generally come under two types of visas. The most popular one is the F1 student visa, and this is what most of our students are here under. The main thing that we want to highlight is that for students on an F1 visa to work off campus or to train off campus, as we'll learn about in the next slide, they do have to have authorization from us as a university because they are here to study. And so basically everything that they do while they're here must relate to their course of study. J1 students are generally, visas are generally used for students in exchange programs. And sometimes there's even a J1 internship visa. We don't see a ton of those. And they too require authorization. But for most employers, the students that you encounter are most likely going to be here on an F1 visa. I think, Mar, right, the students who come here on a J1 visa, their employment or their internship opportunities are almost lined up from the start.
Well, I mean, so you mentioned the J1 intern program. I think I can give a kind of a shout out to an initiative we have going on. We started before the pandemic in our office, which was to build the J1 intern program. And so those are actually students who are coming from institutions abroad to have their experiential learning experience on campus. And then they're going to go home or wrap up their studies as part of having this experience at their institution abroad. So they are never Case Western Reserve University students. They're not degree seeking. The other type of J1 student that we have, they are degree seeking. And so they, like F1 students, could find an opportunity on campus or off campus to pursue. So they have the flexibility to within their field of study find something that aligns and enhances their experience here. So I hope that clarifies the
absolutely.
difference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is one of the more detailed slides. So let's get into what practical training is, and we're going to look at both CPT and OPT. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about OPT because I know that's the topic of the next webinar in this series, but I think it's important to understand how they relate to one another and just to have that context as you're engaging international students for internships, co-ops, and the like. So practical training is a type of training authorization for F1 students and is intended to provide hands-on practical experience in situations that supplement and complement a student's academic program. So again, I think what's really important here is, again, acknowledging that anything that, any experience that they have, it has to be connected to their academic program at the university. It must be integral to an established curriculum. Now, at some universities, they might have experiential learning requirements for every single student as part of the institution. So that's already baked into the curriculum. And so that, might meet CPT. Here at Case Western Reserve, we have very few credit-bearing internship or co-op programs. So there's not as much of it as part of the inherent, required curriculum. But we do have dedicated internship and co-op programs like practicum and co-op, and we'll go over kind of how those function later in the presentation. But it's through those programs that students would be able to achieve approval for their CPT. CPT also takes place while the student is in school. So this is while they are a current student before they graduate. They are eligible after completing one academic year of study. So, here that's a fall semester and a spring semester. And its relationship to OPT is that every student, international students have 12 months of CPT that they can utilize while in school. If they hit 12 months or more, then it forfeits their ability to participate in OPT. And that is also just full-time. So if a student were to participate in a part-time internship, so 20 hours a week or fewer, then that does not count against their CPT allotment. OPT.
We have a lot of students. I'm sorry, Drew, I don't
Yeah,
want to interrupt.
go ahead.
I just, in an effort to, again, emphasize how easy it is to work through the logistics of something like this. We do have students who will engage in part-time opportunities multiple semesters.
Yeah.
And they just keep going through the process, working with the right people, finding those employers that see what a great investment in their time they are, and then they have this great relationship that's going on there as for both of them, really. And just one other sort of nuance that I want to mention in terms of when students are eligible. In general, we say it's after completing one academic year. There are some exceptions to that, particularly when you're talking about graduate students and the nature of the work that they're doing. Drew mentioned that there aren't very many programs at the university that require an experience like this. But if there were a case where having this experience were vital at a specific time, maybe even earlier than that academic year, those are things that we would help a student navigate along with people in Drew's office, employers, help them figure out how to make that happen. And it's really one academic year that they're in F1 status. And this may be getting into the weeds a little bit, but we have students who are coming from all different educational levels and backgrounds within the United States. Again, so it may not be so clear up front as to when they're eligible, but that's why my office is here and my colleagues are here to help have those conversations in partnership with Drew's office, or even work with Drew's office and speaking with an employer and the student and trying to figure out what's possible.
Yeah, thanks, Mar. And we obviously work with undergraduate students and graduate students. And at the undergraduate level, having, to participate, to be here for a full year is not a limitation at all. I mean, generally, I think we would, say that's probably a good thing to not jump right into an internship or something in your first year. But obviously at the graduate student level, we do have some accelerated programs, 1 year or even at 2 years, as you mentioned, Mar. And so thanks that, obviously your office helps figure out a way for them to participate in some of these experiences, especially if it's part of the curriculum. So optional practical training, same with curricular practical training, it must be connected to a student's field of study. And again, I mean, most students, just in general, domestic or international, most students' internship opportunities are related in some way to their major or their field of study. But in the case of international students, it really does have to be connected and justified. You might have, for instance, an English major who wants to, a domestic student who's an English major and wants to go into finance. If that's an international student, it might be a little more challenging to make that connection. But again, we often find that a lot of our international students are pursuing majors that have a little bit more of a linear connection to their career paths anyway. So again, there's usually not a big issue with this, but it is something that we have to be mindful of, especially as we review their opportunities that they get them. Optional practical training typically takes place after graduation. So this is, they have graduated as a student and they have a full-time, usually, job opportunity with an employer. At that point, the employer is still, you are not sponsoring the student. They are still here under their F1 visa, and they have 12 months of OPT available to them. And then if they are within a grouping of STEM qualified majors, they could have up to 24-month extension on top of that. So when I talk with employers often about why they're not open to or interested in hiring international students, a lot of times the response I get is that, well, we like to convert a lot of our interns into full-time hires, and then we want to retain our full-time hires for a number of years because we invest a lot of time and resources into that. And if we have to sponsor them and we don't know what that's going to look like, then we don't even want to start at the internship level. And I wanted to share this slide and the next one just to show how much time you actually can get with an international student before you even have to start considering going through an H-1B process or anything like that. It's really quite extraordinary. Mar, before I show sort of like a timeline in the next slide of what a possible tenure of an international student might look like, anything to add on OPT here or the relationship between CPT and OPT?
Nope, I think you covered it.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to construct kind of a sample timeline here, and not that this is a sort of advised timeline that everybody should do this, but I really developed it just to show again how much time you could have with an international student with your organization prior to sponsorship. So let's say it's an undergraduate student and they go through their first year of academic study, and then they sign on with you for a full-time summer internship. Let's say it starts in June and goes through August, a typical summer internship. That would use up 3 months of their available 12 months of CPT. Let's say they do a really fantastic job for you, which most of our students do, and you want to keep them on, on board during the academic year on a part-time basis. You could do that, and it won't count towards any of the CPT available to them. And so through their second year, let's say they work a few hours a week part-time, and then they come back on in the summer for another full-time internship. Now they're at 6 months, follow the same pattern all the way through their third year. You could get to their senior year and still they've only used 9 months of full-time CPT, and they've worked with you since basically the summer after their first year. And then after that, you would move into the gray boxes are OPT. So again, you could have 12 months and then a 24-month extension. So that's 3 years of full-time employment on top of essentially the 3 years that they've been working with your organization. So that's 6 years of work with your organization of impact that these students can have that you could potentially be forfeiting by not opening yourself up to hiring them. And obviously, as an internship, and we call it training because obviously it's a learning experience for the students. They're gaining knowledge by working at your organization that complements and supplements their academic study. But like any other intern too, they are contributing to your organization, right? They want to work on real projects. They have, major skill sets to add. So again, just think about this timeline and what you could be gaining from international students by hiring that first one as an intern using CPT. So I want to talk just a little bit about recruiting international students. So let's say the information we're sharing so far has piqued your interest. You realize that, wow, it's really not that big of a deal. I want to help fill some of those tough to fill positions in my organizations. How do I go about it? No, you don't have to bring a fully electrified motorcycle to our career fairs to attract international students like this picture shows. And really, I think part of it is you don't have to do much of anything different. I think you want to be open to international students. One of the things I know when I first started working at Case Western Reserve University, again, back in 2008, I remember going to career fairs and there would be signs on the tables at the fair that said, we don't hire international students. So I had to go up to the employers and tell them to remove the signs, right? So that's not a welcoming message to send. So part of it is to approach it as you would any other candidate and not, put up some of those negative messages and really be positive about your approach. So here are some best practices. So again, one, just be open. If you open yourself up to those conversations, to engaging with students in the conversation, you'll be able to meet a lot of great candidates and understand the value that they can bring to your organization, which you preclude if students understand that you're an organization that doesn't hire international students, right? They don't want to waste their time as much as you don't want to waste your time. And so if word starts to spread among our international students that you're an organization that doesn't hire them, they'll probably honor that and steer clear, and then you'll miss out. But if they do understand that you are open to hiring international students and you make that openness known, then they will be very interested in learning more about your company, learning more about your opportunities. And when I talk about make your openness known, yes, it's making it known to students, but also share with your partner institutions. So if we know that you're an organization that is interested in hiring international students, we can help you build your talent pipeline. We can connect you to student groups on campus or get in front of groups that are interested in hearing what you have to say and help you with that recruitment process. Recruiting for entry-level talent isn't easy. We know that. We work with employers every day. And the more we communicate with you, the more we understand your needs and what you're looking for, we can help you. I know Global Cleveland also offers the same kind of assistance as well. So make sure that you're communicating with those institutions and local organizations. I think it is important, especially if you are attending these presentations and expanding your knowledge of the process and what it means to hire international students, the more you can inform and train anyone who represents your company at recruiting events, I think the better. So career fairs are a perfect example. Sometimes the person from the organization that signs the company up for the career fair isn't always the one who's attending the fair. And so there's sometimes a misalignment in terms of, what positions we're recruiting for, what our policies are. We love to see alumni representing employers, and oftentimes companies send alumni to our fairs, which is great. Sometimes the alumni, though, and often they're not in human resources, right? They are themselves an engineer or a financial analyst or what have you. And so they're here to talk to students, but they might not necessarily know the company's stance on hiring international students or what the process looks like. So the more that those of you who are in human resources can train and inform your representatives ahead of the fair and say, hey, we're open to hiring international students. Talk to them like you would any other candidate. I think that's going to go a long way. And then use your knowledge to your advantage, right? So if you are taking the time to understand CPT and OPT and H-1B by attending these sessions and doing more, you're going to have an advantage over employers who aren't taking the time to understand the process and understand how fairly straightforward it is. You will be able to gain access to a talent pool that others won't, and so you can profit from that. A quick note, I know not everybody uses Handshake, but most major colleges, universities now are on Handshake. So if you are in a university recruiting position, I'm sure you have experience posting positions on Handshake. And as an employer, when you post a position or even when you sign up for a fair, you'll be presented with questions that are standard from Handshake, asking you about your position on hiring international students. And so I wanted to go over this just so you know how your responses to these questions actually show up on the student side and what it actually means. So I just took a screenshot here of a sample of how someone might fill out a job posting. So first question, does this position require US work authorization? Yes. The second question, eligibility for international students, non-US citizens or permanent residents. Would you sponsor a work visa for the right candidate? So I put no here, not because I'm encouraging people to select no. I want you to select yes. But if you were to select no for this, you're essentially saying we will not sponsor a student for an H-1B or another work authorization post-graduation. For the third one, are you willing to hire candidates that are temporarily authorized to work for a defined period in their field of study? And again, it gives the example of OPT and CPT. Yes. So this series of responses basically says, we are open to hiring international students, bringing international students into our organization as an intern or a co-op under CPT, and even have the possibility of them staying on under OPT. Again, the institution is sponsoring them, but we are not willing to sponsor them past that period. That's what these responses would indicate to a student. And if the international student, when they fill out their profile, even if they said that they aren't authorized to work in the US, this will still show up to them as that they are qualified for the opportunity. So again, I wanted to sort of put that up because I know even for employers, sometimes the series of questions you have to go through can be confusing, but also students have to answer these questions on their side as well, whether they're filling out an application to your position on your website or going through Handshake, and it can be really confusing, right? So even the question, are you authorized to work? A student might not actually know because technically, right, are they? Well, they haven't filled out the CPT paperwork because they don't have a job offer. So they don't know if they're qualified or not. So it's very confusing. And I think if you are posting positions, on your website, the more you can be sort of a little bit more general in your language or talk more about the CPT and OPT, the better. It's gonna be easier for the international students to understand.
I totally agree with what you just said, Drew, about how confusing it is. That is one of the questions we get asked most frequently is how do I interpret this as a potential candidate? And I will say, honestly, like sometimes it's very clear that they're talking about long-term sponsorship, the H-1B, but sometimes it is not. And I always tell students, is like, if you have contact information at this place of employment, reach out to them directly, ask them very specifically, tell them about what your situation is and see if they can help sort it out. Because the last thing students want to do is misrepresent themselves too.
Mhm.
They understand how very, very important it is to have everything exactly in place, that it takes a lot of planning on their part, and they are very willing to do it. But they want to be upfront and transparent with employers about what their limitations are too, because they know it's also important to them. And building that trust and that relationship right off is key.
Yeah, great point. I know when I work with international students in their searches and we encounter a position description and we're going through some of the questions, or they'll say, I'm applying, but I don't really know how to answer these questions. And yeah, it is really confusing. And again, to their credit, they don't want to misrepresent themselves. They want to be upfront, but they also don't want to prematurely, preclude themselves from consideration by answering something incorrectly, when, actually they are fully qualified or have the ability to participate in the experience. So just some quick kind of tips about hiring international students. And this really relates to kind of what's involved on the employer side with curricular practical training, which again, isn't really that much and isn't that different from probably the practices you follow for hiring any intern or co-op student. But one thing we do need when we are authorizing a student under CPT is we do need a fairly detailed offer letter from you, the employer. So it should be on official company letterhead that includes, a very specific location, the title of the position that the student will be occupying, very specific start and end dates, hours per week. Again, those are details that we need to approve the CPT, and we can't without them. So if you provide an offer letter that is a little bit more general or doesn't have this information, then the student's probably going to be reaching back out to you to get some extra details. So again, I think a lot of company offer letters that we see provide this information from the start. And so again, no big difference, but if not, you might have to provide a little bit more detail in those offer letters, just so that we can process that paperwork. Also, and again, I know a lot of employers, you're recruiting in September for internships that don't start to the summer. So there is ample lead time, but sometimes you're filling positions that you need people to move into more quickly. We do need some lead time to process the paperwork. So, and sometimes this is on the part of the student, but if we get an offer letter today, for instance, asking a student to start on Friday, that's not enough time for us to process the paperwork and get them all set up. So usually we need at least a week. But again, the more advanced notice we have, the better. And I'll explain why when I go through what the student has to do on their end, at least for our programs at CASE, so you can understand why we need a little bit more lead time. Also part of the process, the student will need to identify a supervisor at the place of work. And so again, if you have that information fairly early on, it does help the students go through the steps they need to enroll in our program. So I know sometimes that information isn't exactly clear at the point that you make an offer, but if you can work with the student to identify a supervisor fairly quickly, that'll help expedite the process for the student. And then there are some other steps associated with the school's internship co-op program. Again, I'm going to go over what we do at CASE. Every school has different programs, but a lot of them are very similar. So I think if you understand what takes place here at Case Western Reserve, you'll probably see some similar things in programs at other institutions as well. Mar, any other tips here? Then okay. So this is a very sort of pared down, simplified version of the process at CASE. So and this is really from the student's perspective. So once they receive an offer from an employer for an opportunity, an internship or a co-op opportunity, usually they will either go to Mars office and contact them, and Mar will refer them to us, or they will come to us directly, and we will go over this process of what it takes to enroll in our practicum or co-op programs. And then obviously, based on what we describe to them, they will likely have to communicate with you back and forth, maybe to get some extra details in the offer letter, or some details about the location where they're going to be, or the supervisor and their email address. So just expect that there's a little bit of communication back and forth, but not too much. So again, here at CASE, we have two formal internship programs, practicum and co-op. I'm not going to go in, they're very similar. Basically, co-op is for our engineering students and practicum is for everybody else. They are an academic program, so they aren't credit bearing, but they do earn transcript notation, and students actually enroll in a course through our student information system. And so this is one of the reasons why going through these programs satisfies the CPT requirements for Mars office. As part of the program, every student has a faculty advisor, so they need to find an advisor here at the university to serve as their faculty advisor during the experience. In co-op, usually there's one sort of associated with each of the majors. Within practicum, it's usually pretty individual, so students have to be able to identify that person. They have to go through an application process on Handshake with us just to get the process going. As an international student, they do have to go through a CPT workshop, which Mars team has created, which is awesome. And they can go through the workshop and learn everything that they need to do, and then complete some of the associated paperwork. And then they, like I mentioned, they actually do enroll in a course. And as part of the CPT paperwork, they need to show proof that they're enrolled before they can be approved for CPT. I want to mention that practicum and co-op these are programs that are open to all students at CASE. It's not just international students, and we have a lot of domestic students going through these programs. So you might see these requirements, regardless of the student that you're hiring from CASE. But international students have to go through one of these, or again, if it's part of their curriculum, they have to do it in order to participate. So, we have students who don't go through practicum or co-op and just, land an internship with a company for the summer, and it's not through us, and that's fine because they're US citizens and they can do that. But for the international students, they really have to go through one of these programs to tie it deliberately to their curriculum, which I would argue is actually better. I wish, more domestic students went through our program because it has built-in structure, right? You have a faculty advisor, you have someone from our office here to support you. You have contacts at ISS. You have, you create learning objectives prior to the start of your experience. So these are goals that you want to achieve during your internship or co-op. Those need to be reviewed and approved by the faculty advisor and the supervisor at their internship or co-op. So that's also why identifying a supervisor early on makes it easier for the students to work through the process. So they're not, pestering all the time to identify a supervisor, because it's not just putting their name on a form. They have to share their learning goals with the supervisor and have those approved. We also have some evaluations as part of the program that will be sent to the supervisor at the end of the experience. We do a midpoint check-in as well, where our practicum coordinator checks in with the supervisor and the faculty advisor. So kind of a benefit there is that the employer gets contact with our faculty, which is always nice. And then the student does have to produce a reflection at the end of the experience, again, to sort of come full circle with their experiential learning experience. So again, I share this information just so that as you work with our international students or international students from other institutions, you're kind of aware of the steps that they need to take on their end, and why they might be, reaching out to you for extra information, or why they need maybe a little bit more time to get started on things, because we make them go through some of these steps. We try to be as clear as we can and helpful as we can to the student on our end, so that they're not having to reach out to you multiple times and ask you a million questions. Again, this is more on us, but there are some steps for the employer and the supervisor to follow as well. Mar, anything I missed in this process from your end that you can think of?
I think the only thing I would add is you mentioned your timeline for needing to work through, some step 1 and some of step 2. We also have time, not time constraints, but like a time frame from the time that a student completes the required workshop to the point that they hand in the full packet of documentation that we need to evaluate and review. It takes us 3 to 5 business days to do that. And that is because we are thoroughly looking at everything that they've submitted. And because we do get a lot of requests too. CPT is very popular because it's an attractive option, and PGPE makes it very easy for students to go through this and ultimately gain their authorization. So I think if you're thinking backwards in terms of the whole time frame, 2 weeks at minimum is probably about right. That's 5 business days on Drew's end, 5 business days on my end. Surely if we can expedite, we do, but having clear and realistic expectations up front that it could take up to 5 business days is always helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think this goes back to if you want to be the employer that is active in recruiting international students and is helpful. Obviously, a lot of this responsibility is on the student, but the more you know about the process, if in communicating with the student, you say, hey, where are you in enrolling in your school's internship program, or have you started your CPT paperwork? Just again, hopefully they know, hopefully they've connected with our office, but sometimes they don't, or sometimes they wait a little bit longer than they should to come meet with us. And then, we're kind of harried to get it all done. So as an employer, if you want to sort of check in with them and just ask where they are, or what are their next steps, I think that could be hugely helpful to us and to the student. Again, not a requirement by any means, but again, I think sort of best practice that could be very helpful. And I just want to reiterate again, part of this too is that a student absolutely cannot start their experience before their CPT has been approved, before the listed start date on their offer letter, because then they jeopardize their visa status. So we do, and Mara especially, we take that very seriously. So if we have to, push things back, we will do that. And in the event that happens, we just ask for your patience, but it's usually it's worth it. And so, yeah. Okay, final thoughts. Really, hopefully the message got across that as far as curricular practical training is concerned, it's very easy. There's minimal extra steps on the employer's part, and it's a great way to bring talented students into your organization, to get connected with them, see if there's potential to bring them on, hopefully full time. And as we show with the timeline, you can keep them within your organization for a very long time, even before you have to consider sponsorship. So I guess we'll move to questions.
Thank you so much, Drew and Mar. I appreciate, that was so much information for everyone that's watching. This is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. So the depth of information that you've provided today, which we are very thankful for, will be saved for posterity. We do have 3 questions in the Q&A, and I will just ask them in order. So the first question is, the 12 months limit of full-time CPT, is it the same for both undergrad and graduate students?
Yes.
Okay. Question number 2, thank you very much. What initiatives do the universities take, or does your university take, to make the employers understand the hiring process for CPT students? So after, I'm assuming, you get into contact with the employer, do you have any initiatives other than doing presentations like this?
Yeah, so a lot of it's basically through the programs themselves. So if a student is working with an employer to get hired for an internship, we send them a packet with all the program requirements, the employer responsibilities listed out, the student responsibilities. If it's an international student, what are the steps involved? And so, we do spell that out in documentation. We track through our career fairs. There's a way for employers to indicate if they're open to international students or not. And so we use that information and share it with students and connect with employers. My staff and I are constantly having strategy meetings with employers to understand what their talent needs are, how we can help them connect the students and build a pipeline. And usually as part of those conversations, we are talking about these processes and debunking myths and trying to share with them how easy it is. But that's mainly the extent of it.
Wonderful, thank you. And speaking of myths, our third question is, if you could name the top 2 or 3 misconceptions of hiring international students through CPT, what would they be and how do you address them?
I think one of the main ones is just this language around sponsorship, right? I think a lot of employers think that even for an internship, that somehow they are then sponsoring the student, or that it involves, a lot of extra steps on their process, or that, there's financial implications, and really that, again, as we established today, that couldn't be further from the truth. That really only comes into play once you start talking about H-1Bs. And even then, I think one of the myths is that it's like really, really expensive. And I think when you think about how much money employers dedicate to recruitment events and attending fairs and posting jobs and doing X, Y, Z, the amount of money it costs to have, an attorney process an H-1B or go through, it's really not that expensive considering what you get. So, Mar, what do you have anything that you see a lot?
I absolutely agree. I think it comes to it being a heavy lift on the part of the employer, and that lift looks a million different ways, right? So there's your multiple misconceptions right there, right? That it's very hard, and that it's very expensive. And really, like Drew said, if you're putting everything into perspective, an H-1B processing is about $3,000 if you request expedited processing. If you've worked with a student for 3 years or something like that, right, and you do the math, that's money well spent if you think about all that they've contributed to your organization or your product, whatever it is. And you've really done very, very little at that point, besides the dedicated training and investment in their time and their development as your employee, right? Everything before that, the paperwork was very, very minimal. And I think a lot of employers sometimes have had experiences with the H-1B that haven't been so positive. And so there's just sort of this trickle down effect, that it has to be difficult in other ways. And it just, CPT is one of the easier things. It's a gray area for us a lot of times to navigate, but we've gotten really, really good at figuring out how to make it an accessible option for students and employers. So yeah, I echo everything that Drew said.
And we've been doing this for many, many years, Mar, and I can't even recall an instance where, a student had worked with an employer who wanted to sponsor the student through an H-1B, and they didn't make it through the lottery. We know it's a lottery, and it happens, but it's very rare. I mean, usually the employers who decide they want to hire international students for internships and convert them to full-time, they have a fantastic experience, and the students stay there for quite a long time. So I think that's also one of the myths that, and again, I don't, maybe at some employers you have an awesome, retention of early talent, but we know, especially in this marketplace, you can't guarantee you're going to hang on to any early recruit for more than 3 to 4 years. I mean, it's a very agile marketplace, and in many respects, you might actually be able to retain international students longer than you would a domestic student. But I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. We had one final question come through, and the question is, at the CPT final, so at the end of CPT, is there extra time? Are there options for extensions? I did see that there was one for STEM students. Are there any other extension options?
So CPT is really, it's limited to the time that you're an enrolled student. So if you're ending your program and want to continue your training, right, optional practical training is essentially your transition at that point. That's what's going to enable you to continue a relationship with an employer. So I hope that answers the question. But if you're not graduating, right, and you're there for one summer, say after your first year, like in Drew's example, and that employer wants you to stay on into the fall or something like that, right? That's just another application process. You go with our office. So it is possible to keep applying. We don't think of them as extensions because they are new individual applications that you would work through with co-op or practicum in addition to the documentation we give you. But really your CPT eligibility ends with your degree being conferred. And that's when, in the appropriate time frame, you're thinking about your transition to OPT.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And we have the fifth and final question. I'm sorry, we don't have time for any more questions. However, this just also came in. Approximately what percentage of F1 and J1 students at CWRU end up participating in CPT and or OPT?
Oh gosh. I should have been prepared with that data. That's a really great question. So I can tell you right now for OPT, it's easier for me to have that number readily in my head. But at any given time, we have 400 to 600 students on some sort of cycling in and out of their OPT or going from OPT to STEM OPT. And we know that because there's other tools and things like that we easily can query off of and run reports. With CPT, because they're enrolled students, we're just kind of looking at them the same way. They're just enrolled students doing CPT. Anecdotally, right, if I had to think about the number of applications I see come through the door on any given day, I mean, I would say, oh gosh, I don't even want to guess. Drew, do you have a better idea about what you guys are doing for practicum? Y'all are busy, I know that.
Yeah, I mean, international students comprise, probably 80% of our practicum participants. But yeah, in terms of the percentage of the population, I think the total student population, by the time they graduate, I think we have like 68% report participating in at least some form of like an internship. And, I think for international students, it's probably slightly less, but not too far behind. They're pretty active.
Wonderful. Wow. I'm glad to hear that the number is high. That's actually, encouraging.
I have 6 pending requests in my inbox right now. So,
wow.
And it's Monday morning. So
that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you two, Mar and Drew. Thank you for offering your combined decades of experience in this field and sharing it with us and with the business community and with the community at large. We really appreciate it. And thank you, David Fleschler, your colleague and Our former chairperson, thank you for also taking part in introducing these two wonderful speakers. I also want to thank our sponsors once more, SwageLock, Team Neo, Brown Immigration Law, the City of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, Clockwork 9, and the Greater Cleveland Partnership. Now, just a reminder, this was the first of the Global Employer Series webinar series for 2023. The second is scheduled for 2 to 3 p.m. this Wednesday, February 15th, and it will be on OPT. Please, if you have not registered for that, register now and check out our website, globalcleveland.org, for more. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate everyone who's been in attendance. I appreciate all of you, and I will see you soon. Thank you so much.